Hi everybody, I'm Jim Skelly and this is the Global Conversation. It's the third of our mini lectures for the spring semester 2011. There's a great deal to talk with you about today. I have to say that I'm very impressed with student engagement in the class so far. The course discussions are absolutely excellent. There was a number of, and those of you who haven't joined in any of these discussions, I would urge you to do so because they're very, very rich, I must say. Particularly impressed with Andrew Summers' piece, posting the piece on the Great Food Crisis of 2011 from Foreign Policy magazine. Andrew also posted a very interesting video detailing how climate change is affecting the Inuit up in the regions of Alaska and the North Pole. Absolutely great stuff. So please join those course discussions, okay? A couple of other things. We should now, depending upon when you started the semester, you should be either at theme number 4, in which you should be looking at the century of the self, or perhaps theme number 5. Do watch the Century of the Self, and if you can watch all of them, I guess it's 4 hour-long videos, that'd be great. But the first one will really give you a sense of the way in which you've been socialized to consumerism. In theme number 5, one of the great little videos to watch is Your House Without You. It's a play on Alan Weisman's book, which we're using in the class, called The World Without Us. And this is an animated cartoon. What would happen to your house over some period of time if nobody was living in it? Also, don't let the Diamond reading go. I mean, you should be engaged with Jared Diamond's work all along. You're going to find it very useful as a kind of marker for the entire course. So do stay up with that, because Diamond looks at other societies that exceeded their environmental limits, and that seems to be what's happening with us, but on a global level. And so it's really worth your taking a look at. Other students will be joining us within the next week. Students joining us at the Institute in Hungary. They will come from a number of different countries, and I think therefore significantly enrich our conversations. Azerbaijan, Turkey, Cameroon, more from Lithuania. We had 2 students, Eustace and Donatas, join us this week. They're here on an Erasmus scholarship at the University of Ulster. I'm delighted that they could join us. And then by next week, we hope to have the learning circles formed. It looks like we're going to have so many students this semester that we will probably add a couple more learning circles. So there'll be a notice coming out about that in the next day or so from Chris Shonas, who'll be coordinating the learning circles this semester. So keep your eyes open for that. You might want to change your choices. If we don't hear from you that you do want to change your choices, we'll just assume that what you may have already sent is in fact sufficient. Now, I have to say I've been delighted. I've been educated by the absolutely wonderful response to the exercise about where does our stuff come from. I was just amazed by it. I was amazed doing my own, but everybody else seemed to be quite amazed as well. And so I was really delighted by that. I'm sure that you all knew that there had to be a part 2 to our exercise on where our stuff comes from. So let me provide you with an overview, which I'll also post in the email that I send out tonight. And I've already created a second forum on the website, so you'll be able to take a look at that shortly. And it's a simple enough exercise, but what I'd like you to do, now that you have a personal sense of the scope of globalization, in part 2 of the exercise, you should take one item of your stuff and see what kind of information you can find out about how it was made. It's probably easiest to choose one item of clothing, and amongst your clothing, probably a shirt or a t-shirt. I doubt that you can find out much, if anything, about the particular item. So what you should try to do is take one item of your stuff and see what you can find out about how it was made, or shirts like it were made, in the country of its origin. In this regard, I recommend using countries like Bangladesh, for example, Cambodia, El Salvador, Namibia, Jordan, Lesotho, etc., as there's a great deal more information about conditions under which clothing and other garments are made in those countries. After you've done a bit of research, post what you've found out. 3 or 4 paragraphs, more if you'd like, but let's say a minimum of about 250 words, which is normally what you get on one page. And remember, you don't have to do this like an academic essay. It's very informal. Just tell us what you have found out. And I'm going to post, with the exercise, I'll post a number of sites where you can begin to get information, okay? Now, before you start all that, however, I'd like you to take a look at this short video called Decent Work, which was produced by the United Nations International Labor Organization. And what I'd like you to do is see if you don't agree with everything they're advocating. I'll bet that you actually do. So take a look at that now, and then I'll come back to you, okay? Well, there are a lot of organizations that are trying to look after the rights of workers and to make sure that they receive a just wage and that their working conditions are not horrific. A number of them based in the United States, I might add, but there are also some international organizations as well. Now, let me just list a couple of those for you. I'm also going to send you out links to all of these. One is the Clean Clothes Campaign, which is an international alliance of labor unions and non-governmental organizations. Another is the International Labor Rights Fund, which is trying to create a sweat-free world. The International Labor Organization, as I mentioned previously, was the one that sponsors the little animated video that you just saw as part of its Decent Work program. Another organization that's been very, very active in the United States is the National Labor Committee, which was founded to combat sweatshop labor and U.S. government policy in El Salvador and Central America. Now, Interesting that this today is Super Bowl Sunday in the United States, I think. I'm not much of a sports fan, but someone has told me that it should be about now. Um, the women at a place called the Ocean Sky Sweatshop in El Salvador are making NFL shirts, right? You know, these souvenir shirts that everybody buys around this time of year, and just make it seem like they're part of things, right? And they sell for about $25 each. It's an NFL T-shirt, right? And they're paid for each one of these 8 cents, right? The rest of it is the profit of the company and their other costs, but they get 8 cents for each T-shirt. So their wages amount to just 0.3% of the shirt's retail price. They're really worth taking a look at. Another organization is a membership organization. You can join it if you'd like, based in the U.S., called Green America. One of the things that they have on their website, I'm going to post this for you as well, is a guide to ending sweatshops and how you can ensure that you're not buying from places where people are being exploited. And something along the same lines, and a group that's trying to create actually sort of fair trade, if you will, sorts of T-shirts, is the Not for Sale campaign. And Not for Sale is partnered with a social enterprise garment factory in Cambodia, for example, that provides jobs to people who have been trafficked, poor and vulnerable women in Cambodia. They're trying to, provide people with a decent salary, etc. Now, Not for Sale has done something which I think is very, very interesting. They've created an app. It's called Free to Work, and they want to overcome this kind of what they characterize as slavery. With Free to Work, this app, you can easily find specific information about companies and get updates from other people and the latest video and photos from the field. So, for example, you can learn how companies like Nike, or Nike as it's pronounced in the United States, Adidas, Nestle, Hershey's, and Patagonia, for example, are rated, and how they are improving or not. And you can also look into the record of about 40 companies in categories such as clothing, electronics, equipment, accessories, food, and even toys for those of you who still like toys. Not for Sale wants to make a difference and help end what they characterize as human slavery, and I think there's certainly something to their argument. Now, there are controversies around these issues, and one of them is a deep and complicated one. Some of you, especially if you're on campuses in the United States, may be aware of something called United Students Against Sweatshops, a student organization that is both in the U.S. and in Canada. They're also criticizing some of the other organizations, one called As You Sow, right? In other words, so shall you live, or something, something like that. It's a biblical phrase, isn't it? Promoting, I'm not very good with the Bible either. Promoting corporate, environmental, and social responsibility is what As You Sow claims it's doing, through shareholder advocacy, grant making, and innovative legal strategies. Now, As You Sow has just come out and said that one of the best companies around is Walmart. Well, the United Students Against Sweatshops has come out with a critique of all that, and says that they're essentially getting into bed with the major corporations. And so you want to take a look at that controversy, especially if any of you, by chance, are involved with United Students Against Sweatshops or think that you'd like to. Now, the second controversy is more complicated. And let me give you a little background to this, because I think it's terribly important. Some of the background you can get from some of the center-right think tanks. One, for example, is called the Reason Foundation, which was founded back in the apocalyptic year of 1968. It's a nonprofit organization advancing, quote, what they call free minds and free markets, end quote. And I'm going to send you a link to an article that the policy paper that they produced called "Why Do the Poor Stay Poor?" And you know, this is important because there are those, and I'll tell you more about this in a minute, who think that sweatshops are actually a good thing, right? And I have to tell you, you know, I had an old friend who was, she died a couple of years ago, who she and her late husband had founded an organization called Metric Products. Her name was Shirley Magidson. And Shirley and Herb Magidson, her husband, were great social activists. I met them during my case against the United States Secretary of Defense many years ago. And they started their business making the wires for women's brassieres. And so they were an integral part of the garment industry. They now make somewhat more complicated brassieres. But one of the things that Shirley told me that I thought was always very interesting is her company, they started their company in Los Angeles, and at one point I think they had about 100 employees in Los Angeles. They could not compete in Los Angeles with other companies that were having their products made in other parts of the world where labor was cheaper. So they ultimately moved their plant to Mexico, and then of course Mexico became too expensive. So what did they do? Well, they decided ultimately we have to move to Sri Lanka, where labor costs were even cheaper. And we see this phenomenon all over the place. I mean, Dell Computer, which I use, made here in Ireland. Dell just closed its factory in Ireland a year and a half ago, 5,000 people, because labor is about 1/4 of the price that it is here in Ireland in Poland. So they're moving to Poland. How long they'll stay in Poland is another question. But I can send you, if anybody wants some information on Metric Products, they're a very good company, I must say. They manufacture under the highest standards and, you know, international workplace norms of the International Labor Organization, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I would expect nothing less. But they also look at this. They conform to a globally uniform standard for the objective assessment of harmful substances, raw materials, intermediate and end products, etc. So there is the possibility that companies can be very, very good, right? And it's not trivial. And it's one of the reasons why there's been a very interesting debate, and you really should pay attention to this. Nicholas Kristof, who writes for the New York Times, and is the darling of many people. I know one of the teaching assistants is a big fan of his work, and you know, there's a lot to be said for much of the work that Nicholas Kristof does. He's been a great advocate of the education of women, for the education of women in developing countries, and all around seems a very good guy. But about 2 years ago in the New York Times, he wrote an article called "Where Sweatshops Are a Dream," and it caused an enormous amount of controversy. And I want to quote a bit from that article for you. And he says this, and this is right after Obama, of course, became the President of the United States. And he says, before Barack Obama and his team act on their talk about labor standards, in quotes, I'd like to offer them a tour of the vast garbage dump here, where he was at the time, in Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia. And he says it's a Dante-like vision of hell. You know, it's festering refuse emitting clouds of smoke from subterranean fires. It has a stink that leaves you gasping, etc., etc. And even the rats, he says, look forlorn, right? Then he says, the smoke parts and you come across a child ambling barefoot, searching for old plastic cups that recyclers will buy for 5 cents a pound. Many families, he says, actually live in shacks on this smoking garbage. Now, he then goes on to say that Obama and Democrats, Christoph is generally thought of, I think, as a liberal in the American context. The people who favor labor standards and trade agreements mean well, okay? This is all the anti-sweatshop people too, for they intend to fight back at oppressive sweatshops abroad. But while it shocks Americans to hear it, the central challenge in the poorest countries is not that sweatshops exploit too many people, and listen to this, not that sweatshops exploit too many people, but that they don't exploit enough. Talk to these families, he says, on the dump, and a job in a sweatshop is a cherished dream, an escalator out of poverty, the kind of gauzy, probably unrealistic ambition that parents everywhere often have for their children. And then he quotes some of the people in the garbage dump who said they'd love to have a job in a factory. At least that work is in the shade, this one person said. Here is where it's hot. Another woman hopes her 10-year-old boy, who's also scavenging with her, grows up to get a factory job, partly because she has seen other children run over by garbage trucks. I'm not sure of the logic of that, but her boy has never been to a doctor or a dentist, and his last bath was when he was 2 years old. So a sweatshop job, by comparison, would be far more pleasant and less dangerous. Christoph goes on to say, I'm glad that many Americans are repulsed by the idea of importing products made by barely paid, barely legal workers in dangerous factories. Yet sweatshops are only a symptom of poverty, not cause, and banning them closes off one route out of poverty. At a time of tremendous economic distress and other protectionist pressures, there's a special danger that tighter labor standards will be used as an excuse to curb trade. When people ask me, he says, would you want to work in a sweatshop? And he says, no, of course not, but I would want even less, he says, to pull a rickshaw. In the hierarchy of jobs in poor countries, sweltering at a sewing machine isn't the bottom. And he says the best way to help people in the poorest countries is to campaign against sweatshops, isn't to campaign against sweatshops, but to promote manufacturing there. One of the best things America could do for Africa would be to strengthen our program, to encourage African imports. Okay? So he then goes on to say, one of the best hopes of the poorest countries would be to build their manufacturing industries, but global campaigns against sweatshops make that less likely. Now, that caused a firestorm. I will send you links to all of this. But one of the responses is most interesting, and again, you'll find this in one of the things that I'm going to send you. Dear Mr. Christoph, I am writing relating your article in the Times on January 14th. This was January 14th, 2009, two years ago. January 14th, entitled, Where Sweatshops Are a Dream. I am shocked by your economic reasoning malfunction. Maybe you should write an article about the history of slavery in America, how low-cost labor was dragged in chains across the Atlantic, so wealthy landlords can get low-cost production and huge return on investment. History might teach you a lesson. You would probably argue that the slave trade was a route out of poverty for the slaves. Probably slavery was even a dream job and people couldn't wait to be abducted, using your line of reasoning. That's pretty tough stuff, huh? And, this guy makes a great case. Now, more broadly, I think, the deeper problem with Christoph's argument is the decontextualized approach. And you may have heard me talk about looking at the broad context. We live on a planet. And what Christoph does in his argument is accept significant components of the existing system. Competition between workers in different states, for example. right? As long as you have this, chaotic state system that we have on the planet, manufacturers can just say, "Oh, labor's too expensive here," just like my friends Shirley and Herb Magidson, and they have to move their factories because they can't compete. So you want to look at the overall system. Then you want to ask another question. Are the opponents of sweatshops also taking a decontextualized approach? In other words, when they're talking about good sweatshops, good garment manufacturers, are they also making the same mistake? Are both sides just reinforcing the consumerism that dominates our planet? Should we all be buying more stuff to help poorer people in other parts of the world, regardless of the damage to the planet? How does that work? Or are both sides in the argument, therefore, taking a decontextualized approach? And do we really need to think about a completely different approach? Because my own sense is that we cannot continue the massive consumption that we're engaged in, regardless of the conditions under which all of these products are made. Now, that's my little moral rant for the day. Let me finish up by telling you I'm also going to send you a couple of serious games, links to serious games. I don't know if you know about serious games, but they're meant to educate you in the process. One is the Sims Sweatshop, and you get to work in a sweatshop and see how many points you can rack up. And there's a variation that's just come out on this game, and that's called Playfair 2012, which is about the production of garments that will be sold at the Olympics in London in 2012. So a lot to look at this week. Let me know if you have any questions. Keep posting and get in conversation with each other. And if anybody has any questions of me, please get in touch. Take care of yourselves. All the best, and I'll see you in another week.